This is Health Matters, a podcast from Mayo Clinic where we discuss the latest medical advice, news, and research to help you live a happier and healthier life. My name is Kristen Meinzer. I'm a writer and journalist, and this episode, we're talking about HIV. If you were around during the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, you've probably experienced a swirl of stories, facts, myths, nightly news reports, and even musicals about HIV/AIDS. It's a condition that's had an enormous cultural impact. But if you haven't updated your knowledge since then, you're missing out on a lot. There are more people living with HIV than ever before. And no, it's not because infection rates are higher. It's because we found ways for people with HIV to live longer, healthier lives. So this episode, we're going to talk about the new face of HIV, how in a mere 40 years or so, this went from a devastating disease to one where people are living and thriving. And here to walk us through the past, present, and future of HIV is Dr. Maryam Mahmood. She's an infectious disease specialist in Rochester, Minnesota, with a clinical focus in HIV medicine. Dr. Maryam Mahmood, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
This is such an important subject, and it's a subject that throughout my lifetime, our thoughts on have changed a lot. Our medical approaches have changed a lot. Now, let's just start with some of the basics. The term AIDS used to be more widely used. Now, in a medical setting, we hear HIV. What exactly are the differences between these two things?
HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. HIV is that virus that causes AIDS. It's essentially a virus that attacks specific cells within the human body. These cells help us fight infections. And when the HIV virus kills off these cells by infecting the body, it puts you at risk for infections, cancers, and other serious diseases. So having HIV itself is just having the HIV infection. But when HIV causes progressive damage to the human body, it then can lead to AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Mm-hmm. This is just a progressed HIV infection to a stage where you're getting unusual infections, cancers, and other diseases. The other definition of AIDS is when HIV kills your CD4 T cells to a level that's less than 200 on our testing. T cells are a specific type of white blood cell in your body that helps you fight infections. So those are the definitions of AIDS. Either you have unusual infections or cancers related to it, or you have a CD4 T cell count less than 200.
And what does day-to-day life look like for someone who is HIV positive?
It is vastly different to what living with HIV was like in the 1980s and 1990s, and even 10 or 15 years ago. We see a lot of people in our clinic, and the majority of them live very full lives. They're working, studying, they're having families, they have hobbies, they travel. Honestly, most people that we see sort of have regular life problems. You know, they go to school, they go to work, they can't come to clinic because they're in lectures, or they can't come to clinic because we do 8 to 5 and they're 8 to 5. They're living quite complete lives. The human body can't get rid of HIV infection. We can't cure it, but we have very effective treatment for it now, so that if you stay on treatment, stay engaged in HIV care, you have a good chance of living a long, healthy life.
I think a lot of people, especially folks who remember the 90s or earlier, might still be stuck with this idea that HIV is a quote-unquote death sentence. How did we get from that concept to where we are now?
So initially in the 1980s and even into the 1990s, HIV was unfortunately a near universal death sentence for those who were infected. But this is very different in the current era. In the current era, most people can control their HIV infection by taking one tablet every day. Your entire HIV regimen can be put into a tiny little tablet. In contrast to, say, the 1990s and 1980s, when you were on multiple different pills, many different times of the day, injection medications, things that needed to be refrigerated, things that were perhaps toxic or not tolerated well or not even that effective, to be honest. Now, one little pill once a day can keep you healthy lifelong.
We've come such a long way, but HIV stigma is still very real. We know there was an overwhelming stigma in the past. How has that changed over time?
If we think back to the 1980s, when the original reports about HIV infection came out, we didn't even know that it was HIV. So the first reports around HIV just reported unusual pneumonias or unusual cancers, Kaposi sarcoma, in otherwise healthy young gay men. So it was very much labeled around a disease that affected gay men. And that marginalization and that stigmatization really affected how we thought about the disease process, how we isolated people, how we funded efforts to try and figure out what HIV was and treatments for it. In the public lexicon back then, things like gay pneumonia or gay-related immune deficiency or GRID were in newspapers. I think a huge part of the HIV-related stigma was that sense that you did something to get HIV, that it was your fault, that the sex practices or injection drug use, or there was some action that you had that led to this disease. And that kind of moral coloring on it is really just unnecessary.
Yeah.
It's an infection. We should treat it as such. We have effective treatment for it. And reducing that stigma around it really will help get people engaged in care and prevention efforts. So it really took a shift to recognize that HIV can affect anyone,
Hmm.
regardless of your sexuality, regardless of your sex practices, your gender, your socioeconomic status. And that shift has taken a long time. HIV-related stigma has come a long way, but it still persists.
What can everyday folks do to help fight HIV stigma regardless of their status?
I think the key is to be informed with up-to-date, accurate information about HIV, how it's transmitted, how you can protect yourself, how people living with HIV live now on treatment, and creating conversations with family and friends to stay informed and really treat people like human beings, like you would want to be treated.
Yeah, of course. Treat humans
Yeah.
like humans. It doesn't mean you're a good or a bad person because you
Yeah.
have a disease or don't have a disease. It's not
Yeah.
about one's moral standing in the world. So, HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. And AIDS refers to all of the health problems that can happen when the immune system is chronically weakened. But the good news is, today, being HIV positive looks a lot like normal life. HIV is no longer considered a terminal illness. That is amazing progress. Though the positives haven't been able to outpace all of the original stigma of HIV, unfortunately. Stigma, especially when it's rooted in misinformation, doesn't make things easy. So let's sort out fact from fiction. While we're talking about HIV stigma, I think it's also useful to discuss some of the myths that have been perpetuated throughout culture, whether that information is incorrect or simply outdated. So let's talk about some of these common myths, shall we? Myth number one, if you have unprotected sex with someone who has HIV, you will get HIV.
I think this is an important one to break down. There's a concept now in HIV medicine called U equals U, or in HIV advocacy. It means undetected equals untransmittable. U equals U. So people who have HIV being on treatment, being undetected, prevents ongoing transmission of HIV through sex. We have excellent data that's emerged recently that if you have HIV and you're on effective treatment and your viral load is controlled, then your chances of transmitting HIV through sex to a partner are essentially zero. They're so low. So U equals U is very much something that we support here. The other part of this is that even if you have sex with someone who has HIV and it's unprotected sex, not all sex acts are equal, right? So some
Mhm.
sex acts, some scenarios put you at higher risk of HIV. What we traditionally have thought of is that receptive anal sex is your highest risk, and then insertive anal, and then vaginal sex. But if you have a STI, if you have any kind of ulcers or trauma in the area, if you're uncircumcised, all of that can change your risk. If the person that you're having sex with who has HIV is uncontrolled, their viral load also has an impact on potential for transmission.
So there are a lot of factors involved there, and it's not a definite one-to-one at all.
Exactly. You can look at numbers and say 1 in 100 chance, but the truth is you don't need to have sex 100 times to get to HIV transmission, right? Each act could put you at risk of the potential for HIV transmission, which is why prevention is so important.
Speaking of prevention, here's a myth. Condoms and abstinence are the only ways to prevent sexual transmission of HIV.
Oh, we have excellent tools now in HIV prevention outside of condoms and abstinence. I mentioned U equals U earlier, so treatment as prevention is key. The other tools that we have now are HIV prevention medications, so HIV PrEP for short, pre-exposure prophylaxis. And we have 2 excellent oral tablet options and now 2 excellent injectable options as well for prevention.
For those who aren't familiar with PrEP, is it something that a person would take every day for a lifetime? Is it something that would be taken just in the lead up to a sexual encounter?
There's a variety of different ways that you can do PrEP. The oldest is Truvada. It's your once daily pill that you can take consistently. And you can also take it as an on-demand version if you're a cisgender man or a transgender woman. It helps protect against HIV transmission. There's other options like oral Descovy, which is a tablet taken every day. And then there's injectable cabotegravir or Apretude, which is every 2 months as an injection. But the newest really promising one that's just been approved is lenacapavir. It's a 6 monthly injection for PrEP, which will be a real game changer, particularly if it's accessible to a broad range of people.
And who should consider taking PrEP?
The people who should be considered for PrEP are if you might be at risk for HIV transmission. So this is anyone who's had a bacterial sexually transmitted infection, say in the past 6 months. If you've been diagnosed with gonorrhea, chlamydia, or syphilis, then you should ask your provider about getting access to PrEP. If you have multiple partners, or if your partner has multiple partners, if you share needles with people for injection drug use, or if you're exchanging sex for money or drugs, then these are all scenarios where PrEP might be beneficial to try and protect you.
All right, here's another myth. If you've been exposed to HIV, there's nothing you can do.
So we have excellent HIV medicines now, and they can also protect against HIV transmission if you take them within the first 72 hours after an exposure. So if you have unprotected sex and you think you might have been exposed to HIV, if within 72 hours after that act, you get post-exposure prophylaxis, which is 3 HIV medicines, take them for 28 days, then that essentially reduces the chances of you getting HIV to almost zero.
Incredible. Another myth. If you are straight or in a monogamous relationship, you don't need to worry about HIV.
HIV affects everyone, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic spectrum, ethnicity. It doesn't discriminate. A good portion, around 20 to 25% of new diagnoses in the US are through heterosexual contact. So this is not just a virus that infects a certain segment of the population. And that has really been a barrier to people getting screened and getting on treatment because they don't think that they're at risk. And as healthcare providers, we also just don't think of screening them when they should have. So that's a big one.
Some more myths about HIV transmission, that you can contract HIV through mosquitoes, through kissing, and through blood transfusions.
Okay. The blood transfusion one, I think, is the easier one. So the blood transfusions in the past, historically, there was transmission of HIV. So this was before one new HIV existed as a virus and before we had commercial lab tests for it, but also we didn't screen blood products for it. This was way back in the 1970s and 80s. And back then, there was transmission from blood products, particularly to hemophiliacs, which are a high-risk group because they require blood products to stay healthy. But since we got a commercial test for HIV detection, and since we started screening blood products rigorously, the donors and the blood products themselves with highly sensitive HIV testing methods, there's essentially been no definite transmission through blood products in the US. And this has been the case for decades now. The other one was kissing. So you really need blood to transmit HIV or sexual fluids, essentially. So you can't transmit HIV through saliva.
Mm-hmm.
The only exception to this is if you have open sores in your mouth and then you get blood into those open sores, then that's a potential route for transmission, but not through saliva.
And mosquitoes?
Oh, mosquitoes. Yeah. Mosquitoes are interesting because even if they get blood from someone who has HIV, the mosquitoes themselves don't have those T cells or the white blood cells that HIV needs to replicate. So HIV doesn't live for very long within mosquitoes, even if they happen to get it. And then what the mosquito actually puts back into a different human being is their saliva, the mosquito saliva, not blood. So mosquitoes are no.
Mosquitoes, they're irritating, but they're not going to...
Malaria, yes.
Yes.
Annoying, yes. HIV, no.
What other misconceptions have you come across about HIV in this day and age?
Yeah, I think there's another myth that you have to feel unwell in some way to have HIV. So you don't need to get tested if you're feeling fine. But the truth is, most people can have HIV for years and not have any symptoms. When you first get HIV, you might develop sort of a flu-like illness, have swollen lymph nodes, things like that. But after that, you could have no symptoms for decades sometimes until you have manifestations of progressive HIV infection. Another myth that we sometimes hear from patients is that they think that once their viral load gets to undetected in the blood, that they're cured from HIV and that they don't need to keep taking medicines. And that's really not the case. HIV can't be cured right now. Taking medicines every day is the only way to control the virus. If you stop taking the medicine, it not only means the virus will come back, but it could make it more resistant to medicines and harder to treat in the future.
Can you talk about the importance of correcting these misconceptions and myths?
So being informed, being non-judgmental, having accurate, up-to-date information is really critical to treating people with HIV, but also to preventing HIV. We know that if you label a disease process, it makes it harder for people to seek testing. They're afraid of moral judgment. This also affects how well people want to stay in care if they do have HIV or accessing preventive care for HIV.
Our knowledge of HIV has come a long way. Some of the biggest updates are around HIV transmission and prevention. Healthcare providers and HIV activism groups now support U equals U, which stands for undetectable equals untransmittable. That means if someone's HIV viral load is undetectable, the chances of them transmitting HIV through sex are almost zero. PrEP has also been a revolution in HIV prevention. Taking PrEP regularly, or in some cases prior to a sexual encounter, can protect you from becoming infected with HIV. There's also a version of PrEP that you can take within 72 hours of a suspected exposure that reduces your chance of contracting HIV to almost zero. Not only have we made incredible progress in HIV prevention, but treatment options have also improved by leaps and bounds. Let's hear more about those. Let's talk about treatments. What is the standard treatment for HIV patients?
So I mentioned that way back, it used to be very complicated. It used to be a cocktail of multiple drugs, complex to take, not that effective. We also didn't used to treat everyone. We had cutoffs for if you developed a serious infection, we would treat you. If your CD4 count went to less than 500 or 200, we would start treatment. But now the standard is, and has been for over a decade, that everyone who has HIV at the time of diagnosis is offered antiretroviral treatment. And in the modern era, what antiretroviral treatment means for most people is a single tablet that usually contains 3 antiretroviral drugs, sometimes 2, that you take once a day. And for the vast majority of people, especially newly diagnosed people with HIV, this is the case. So the current standard of care is guideline-based treatment with a single tablet every day for the rest of your life as soon as you get diagnosed.
And what about the treatment for AIDS in cases where the disease has progressed?
So, AIDS is a definition based on immune compromise and presence of other infections or diseases. So HIV antiretroviral treatment is still a critical part of treating AIDS. Having the body's immune system be able to come back is really key here. But during AIDS, you can be at risk for a variety of multiple infections and other disease processes. You might have fungal pneumonias like pneumocystis, bacterial pneumonias, tuberculosis or other mycobacterial infections, cancers like Kaposi's or lymphoma are all possible. And depending on how immune suppressed you are, you could have multiple different things happening. So finding out each of the things that that individual is going through and treating those directly is how we treat AIDS, essentially. So it varies person to person, depending on what manifestations of AIDS they have.
Yeah. That being said, different people with HIV/AIDS have had drastically different health outcomes. What are some of the things that make a difference in someone's health status and prognosis?
I think what we've learned is that the key thing is to get tested early and get tested regularly. If we catch HIV infection early on, before it can cause immune damage, and ideally before you have any symptoms related to it, that gives you the best chance of staying healthy lifelong, getting on treatment as soon as possible and staying on effective treatment, and achieving virologic control or an undetected HIV viral load in the blood is critical to staying healthy. So that's one of the most important things. We know that after you're diagnosed, getting immediately linked to good HIV care so that you can access medicines, so you can have any barriers to care addressed is also really important. And we're getting better at that over time, but it's still a real area that needs to be worked on. Staying on the antiretrovirals is important, and getting to an undetected viral load is key here too.
How much does the type of treatment vary from patient to patient?
We have excellent guidelines in the United States, and they're based on very rigorous evidence about what's the safest, most effective, best tolerated, fewest interactions. We use that to say this is the best single tablet regimen for you to treat your HIV infection. If this doesn't work, then we have other options. So the key is just to stay engaged in care and know that we have a lot of potential options.
That is just incredible compared to 35 years ago, where AZT was really the only option, and that just wasn't tolerated by everyone, and it wasn't effective for everyone. So it's fantastic that you can say now, well, if that's not working, we have this. Oh, that's not working, we have this. It really is a different era we're in right now.
For sure.
So speaking of progress, is there anything currently being tested or developed that is exciting or gives you hope for future breakthroughs in the HIV/AIDS world?
I mentioned lenacapavir for PrEP earlier, which will
Mm-hmm.
be a real game changer, especially when we think about HIV globally, particularly, say, women in sub-Saharan Africa or resource limited settings. We're coming to a HIV clinic or a healthcare clinic for oral PrEP, or even the every 2-month injectable PrEP might be a burden. And having to carry oral PrEP can also be stigmatizing and mark you out. So having an injection every 6 months to protect yourself, but not have to reveal your protection status to anyone is going to be a real game changer, hopefully on a global scale here. The other things that are always in the works for HIV, but are a challenge, are the potential for cure therapies and vaccines. But the nature of the HIV virus makes those a bit more of a challenge.
How so?
HIV is a funny virus in that once it gets into your body, it establishes a latent reservoir in various places in the body. And this can be in white blood cells, hidden away in lymph nodes, hidden away in other organs. And we have sort of an incomplete understanding of where this latent reservoir is or what the extent of it is. And that's essentially why HIV can't be eradicated from the body. Because once it gets into this latent reservoir, it's in a sort of a dormant state, if you want to think of it that way. And it can't be killed by drugs in that state. So we would need to wake it up from that latent reservoir and then kill it to really eradicate it. And that has been a challenge that's really prevented vaccination efforts and cure efforts.
And what's the dream scenario for the future of HIV treatment? Do you believe a cure is within reach, maybe in the next 50 years or so?
I mean, I said earlier there wasn't a cure, but actually a few people have been cured of HIV. The most famous one is probably Timothy Ray Brown. He was known as the Berlin patient. He was originally an American who lived in Germany and had leukemia, but he had leukemia, fairly serious blood cancer. And as part of the treatment for that leukemia, he had stem cell transplants and actually ended up having 2 stem cell transplants. The donor that he got the stem cells from was a donor that had a mutation on their cells that made it impossible for HIV to get into the cells. So essentially, they took away his immune system and then gave him back stem cells from a donor that HIV couldn't get into their cells. But this is a really dangerous and significantly immune suppressing thing to go through. but he was cured with HIV after that.
Wow.
So there have been a few other similar cases, but again, stem cell transplants are not an easy way to cure HIV. I think in terms of cure and vaccine efforts, there's a lot of novel technologies, including sort of the mRNA-based technologies that COVID vaccines were based around, that have some potential. But again, it'll likely take many decades for that to come to fruition, if at all.
And this mutation that the donor had in the stem cell case, how common is that mutation?
It's called the CCR5 delta 32 mutation, and it depends on what kind of ethnicity you have. So in people who are of European descent, it's around 10% of the population, but in other ethnicities, it's essentially not there, unfortunately. I will say that in addition to Timothy Ray Brown, multiple other people around the world since then have had similar scenarios where they've needed a stem cell transplant and they've had donors with the CCR5 delta 32 mutation. And some have relapsed afterwards, unfortunately.
Oh, sad.
Yeah.
And for people who are considering PrEP, what advice would you give them?
Many states have programs in place that help people with HIV get access to care, including medication coverage. So regardless of your insurance status, I would also say that PrEP right now should be covered at no cost for the vast majority of people. So there's a CMS mandate based on USPTF recommendations that say PrEP is important for prevention. And based on this mandate, most commercial insurers and Medicare and Medicaid should have a no cost to the patient for medications, PrEP care, labs, and follow-up.
That's so reassuring because access to care is a real issue in America and around the world. And knowing that there's not that obstacle, that's just one more bit of reassurance. And it's just the right thing to do. It's better for all of us in terms of public health.
For sure.
It's such a hopeful image that you're painting and so different than the one that a lot of us grew up with. It's great to be at this point in history where the options are life-saving. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us and for the great work that you're doing, Dr. Mahmood. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, modern-day HIV treatment is one pill a day, every day, for the rest of your life, as soon as you get diagnosed. And there are multiple options available to help find something that's safe, effective, well-tolerated, and minimally interactive. We're also hopeful that one day there will be a cure or vaccine for HIV. It can be tricky because of how the virus hides in the body, but it has been cured before, albeit in a risky and complicated way. In the meantime, also be aware that PrEP is now available in a 6-month injectable form, and insurance providers should cover multiple forms of PrEP at no cost to you. And many states have programs to help folks get access to PrEP regardless of insurance status. We've come so far in treating HIV. The only thing that might be more impressive is how much further we can go. Okay, that's all for this episode. But if you've got a question, a topic suggestion, or a follow-up question about this specific episode, you can leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272. We might even feature your voice on the show. And stay tuned for the next episode of Health Matters, all about vaccines.
Imagine if a car came with a form that you had to sign, listing all the risks of being in a car or driving a car. You probably wouldn't do it. You'd be so scared.
For more Health Matters episodes and resources, head to mayoclinic.org/healthmatters. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. It really does help others to find our show. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care and stay healthy. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.